No one inside the WNBA ever expected that a single player, barely 1 year into her professional career, would disrupt the league's foundation more violently than any collective bargaining fight, ownership dispute, or TV deal negotiation in its 28-year history. But that's exactly what happened the moment Caitlin Clark stepped onto the court. Her impact wasn't gradual or predictable. It was an overnight economic shockwave that forced arenas, executives, and even the players' union to reevaluate what value actually means in women's basketball. Tickets that used to gather dust suddenly sold out in minutes. Merchandise tables that typically closed early because inventory sat untouched were wiped clean before halftime. Cities that barely acknowledged their WNBA franchises were suddenly begging for larger venues because Clark was in town. The rookie who was supposed to simply boost interest had unintentionally become the financial engine of an entire sport. The league had seen stars before, but nothing close to this. Traditionally, the WNBA grew through slow cultural shifts. Moments like the arrival of legends, pushback from athletes advocating for rights, or media coverage after international tournaments. But Clark bypassed all of that. Her stardom wasn't confined to women's basketball fans. It spilled into mainstream sports media, political conversations, corporate boardrooms, and even late-night talk shows. That level of visibility changed the league's economics overnight. For the first time, owners and network partners didn't have to sell fans on the game. They just had to put Clark's name on the schedule and watch demand spike. This sudden explosion in attention triggered something the WNBA leadership never anticipated. The players realized that, for the first time in the league's history, they had real leverage. The union had been debating internally whether to opt out of the existing labor deal, but the debate instantly shifted tone once Clark entered the league. It wasn't just a negotiation tactic anymore. It became a realistic opportunity to reshape the financial structure of the sport. The union's vote to opt out wasn't merely symbolic. It sent a message that the current economic model no longer matched the new reality. And every player understood one truth, even if they didn't want to say it out loud. This leverage existed because of Clark. Executives watched in real time as arenas filled with fans who weren't loyal to the teams they were watching. They were loyal to Clark. Television networks saw ratings numbers that the league had never touched before. Games that used to meet modest viewership benchmarks suddenly eclipsed primetime standards. Clark's presence turned ordinary matchups into national events, and that visibility exposed every crack in the league's infrastructure. The WNBA had always operated with the safety net of modest expectations. But now, with billions of dollars in future TV revenue on the line and millions of new fans paying attention, the margin for error evaporated. Veteran players, some of whom had spent over a decade grinding through low salaries, exhausting travel conditions, and minimal marketing support, understood instantly that their moment had arrived. Clark's popularity didn't just elevate her, it elevated the entire labor force. But this surge also created tension. Players who had never experienced this level of attention began feeling overshadowed. Executives who thought they had years to modernize the league suddenly found themselves behind the curve. And fans who had just discovered the WNBA began questioning why basic elements, like charter flights, market visibility, and fair compensation, were only becoming topics after Clark's arrival. That disconnect between long-standing norms and the league's new reality became the spark that ignited the current crisis. What began as a young star inspiring new interest quickly morphed into a complete restructuring of expectations. Clark didn't just raise the bar, she changed the entire playing field. Networks, owners, and corporate sponsors weren't gearing up to negotiate with the WNBA as a whole. They were preparing for a future built around one superstar whose influence outpaced the league's ability to contain it. And now, with the players' union officially opting out of the CBA, the league is entering territory it has never navigated before. It isn't dealing with a typical labor dispute. It's dealing with a power imbalance that favors the athlete more than the institution, a situation nearly unheard of in professional sports. The WNBA's revenue structure was built on collective visibility, but Clark has introduced a new model: individual gravitational pull. The league may have created the platform, but she created the momentum. For the first time, the WNBA faces an existential question. When the success of the entire league relies disproportionately on one player, who truly holds the power? Long before the WNBA realized it was standing on unstable ground, another force had already begun forming quietly in the background, one that would eventually become the league's biggest nightmare. Unrivaled, the new 3-on-3 league founded by Brianna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, was originally pitched as a safer, more flexible off-season alternative for players who didn't want to risk their bodies overseas. At first, executives brushed it off as a niche experiment, something that might attract role players or veterans looking to extend their careers. But that perception evaporated the moment rumors surfaced that the league wasn't just trying to sign Caitlin Clark. They were preparing to make her an offer unlike anything seen in women's sports. This wasn't a standard salary discussion. Industry insiders began whispering about a deal structure that looked far more like a tech startup acquisition than a sports contract. Reports hinted at potential equity stakes, profit-sharing models, and long-term brand partnerships built directly into the agreement. Instead of being just another athlete, Clark would essentially operate as a part owner, someone who benefited not only from her on-court performance but from the future growth of the entire enterprise. That kind of offer is extremely rare, and almost impossible for the WNBA to match under its current ownership rules. It immediately shifted the balance of power in ways the league was completely unprepared for. Think of what this means in practical terms. Instead of grinding through an off-season in Europe or Asia, where players often face dangerous environments, exhausting travel demands, and intense physical wear, Clark could stay in the United States and make exponentially more money while playing fewer games. Unrivaled would be offering comfort, safety, rest, and enormous financial upside. That proposition alone would be irresistible to any star athlete, but for Clark, it meant something even bigger. For the first time, she had a legitimate alternative to the WNBA. The league no longer had a monopoly on her career path. And that loss of exclusivity is the exact scenario the WNBA spent decades trying to avoid. For years, the league maintained leverage by being the only professional women's basketball option within the U.S. If players wanted visibility, brand opportunities, and domestic career stability, they needed the WNBA. But Unrivaled shattered that structure overnight. The fear wasn't simply that Clark might accept a better salary. It was that she could redefine what elite women's basketball looks like in America. If Clark signs with a league offering equity and creative control, the ripple effect would be massive. Every future superstar would expect the same treatment. Every negotiation would start with an ownership conversation. And the WNBA's outdated compensation system would collapse under the weight of the new standard. This is what terrifies executives the most. Unrivaled doesn't have to defeat the WNBA in popularity. It simply has to lure away the one player who drives the majority of national attention. Clark isn't just a draw. She's the reason networks and arenas see record numbers. Her arrival boosted the entire sports economy around women's basketball. If Unrivaled takes even a fraction of that power, the WNBA will feel it instantly in ticket sales, sponsorships, and broadcast negotiations. Behind the scenes, that fear has turned into panic. Owners who once viewed Unrivaled as harmless now see it as a direct threat to their investments. Executives who used to negotiate from a position of authority suddenly find themselves scrambling to keep up with a league that offers things they legally cannot. Even the players' union is facing pressure, unsure whether to push for more aggressive compensation or risk losing their biggest star to a rival system. And Clark knows exactly how much leverage this gives her. The existence of Unrivaled means she can walk away at any moment without sacrificing financial security, career satisfaction, or public visibility. It is the ultimate bargaining chip. The kind of leverage athletes dream about, but rarely ever achieve. The WNBA has no counterweight. Without Clark, the expansion teams lose projected revenue, networks lose anticipated ratings boosts, and sponsors lose the face of their entire marketing campaigns. Meanwhile, Unrivaled would gain the most influential figure in women's sports, instantly elevating its profile into mainstream relevance. This is why analysts call Unrivaled the ticking clock in the negotiation. Every day that passes without a satisfying WNBA offer gives the new league more time to finalize their pitch. Every hesitation from the commissioner reinforces the perception that alternative opportunities might be better. Clark's team understands this perfectly. They don't need to make threats. They simply need to let Unrivaled exist, and the pressure takes care of itself. Unrivaled didn't just give Clark an option. It gave her the kind of leverage that could restructure an entire sport. From the outside, Caitlin Clark's rookie season looked like a fairy tale. Sold-out arenas, record-breaking viewership, and a wave of new fans who treated every game like a cultural event. But underneath the highlight reels and applause, a very different story was unfolding, one that exposed a deep fracture within the league. As the spotlight on Clark grew brighter, so did the resentment surrounding her. What should have been a historic, celebratory season quickly turned into a crash course in navigating jealousy, hostility, and a level of physical targeting that shocked even neutral observers. Fans weren't imagining things. The hard fouls were real. The body checks were intentional. And the dismissive commentary from veterans wasn't subtle. Every bump, shove, and whispered remark fed into a narrative that Clark was being punished for her popularity. The incident involving Kennedy Carter, where Clark was blindsided away from the ball, became the most replayed clip of the season. Not because it was unusual, but because it encapsulated the frustration simmering across the league. Players who had spent years fighting for respect suddenly felt overshadowed by someone who had barely settled into her locker. This resentment didn't come out of nowhere. Many WNBA players grew up in an environment where visibility was scarce, salaries were low, and recognition from mainstream sports culture was almost non-existent. They had to grind for years just to get casual acknowledgement from the national media. Then Clark arrived, queen of the NCAA, a ratings titan, a corporate magnet, and overnight, the entire world decided to care. That kind of shift is bound to create emotional friction, especially in a close-knit league where everyone knows each other's stories. It wasn't merely professional rivalry, it was a sense of being erased. Instead of extinguishing this tension early, league leadership allowed it to fester. Commissioners in successful leagues understand that when a generational talent arrives, you protect them. You build around them. You make their safety, visibility, and developmental trajectory the league's highest priority. The NBA did it with Magic. They did it with Bird. They doubled down with Jordan. The WNBA, however, hesitated, and that hesitation created a vacuum that was filled by frustration, jealousy, and at times outright hostility. The lack of intervention wasn't just a PR misstep, it was a strategic failure. The frustration became even more blatant when retired legends stepped into the conversation. Sheryl Swoopes, one of the most iconic names in women's basketball history, made comments that came across as dismissive and passive-aggressive, questioning Clark's success and implying it was overhyped. Whether intentional or not, these remarks carried weight. When a pioneer of the sport questions the newcomer in front of millions of viewers, it signals to the rest of the league that skepticism, and even hostility, is acceptable. Meanwhile, referees often appeared reluctant to control the escalating physicality. Fans saw Clark shoved, elbowed, and hit with surprisingly few whistles. The lack of officiating consistency added fuel to the fire. Critics accused the league of allowing Clark to be handled more aggressively than other players to avoid accusations of favoritism. But by trying to appear fair, leadership accidentally helped create an environment that was anything but. The newcomer who was single-handedly revitalizing the league's economy was navigating one of the most physically hostile rookie seasons in modern sports. This has consequences that go beyond bruises. When the league fails to protect its most marketable player, that player begins to question whether the league deserves loyalty. Clark's team has certainly noticed the treatment. Her endorsements depend on her image, her health, and her long-term upward trajectory. Physical targeting doesn't just hurt her body, it threatens her brand, her sponsors, and her business future. The league knows this, yet leadership remained silent for far too long. And that silence made one thing crystal clear: Clark was on her own. Fans didn't need insiders to explain what they were seeing. Social media erupted game after game, with slow-motion breakdowns of every collision. Discussions about mean girl culture within the league became unavoidable. The public narrative shifted from admiration to criticism, and the WNBA rapidly found itself cast as an insecure institution unable to celebrate its best new asset. But here's what makes this situation explosive. Clark's mistreatment has become a central part of the looming labor showdown. Players want more money, but they also want a safer work environment. Clark, however, cannot be expected to sign a long-term agreement with a league that hasn't shown it can protect her physically, politically, or socially. And underpaying her while failing to protect her only pushed her further toward a mindset that the old system no longer works. This wasn't just about fouls. It was about culture. It was about leadership. It was about a league that didn't know how to handle a superstar who became bigger than the institution itself. Clark's arrival didn't create jealousy, it revealed it. And now those tensions have become a crucial piece of the negotiation battlefield, shaping the tone of conversations happening behind closed doors. For a league that wants unity heading into a historic CBA fight, this internal hostility may be the biggest obstacle of all. The deeper you look into the financial side of Caitlin Clark's rookie season, the more shocking the numbers become. On paper, she was earning a salary of roughly $76,000, an amount that wouldn't even cover the game night revenue generated from a single arena when she stepped onto the floor. To casual fans, that number sounds low. To people who understand her economic impact, it borders on absurd. Clark didn't just bring attention to the league, she injected millions of dollars into it within months. The contrast between what she produced and what she earned created a financial tension the WNBA had never faced before. Her arrival didn't just raise attendance for the Indiana Fever. It transformed every team she faced into a temporary goldmine. When Clark played in Washington, the Mystics moved the game to the NBA arena to accommodate demand. Atlanta did the same. Chicago's attendance spiked. Opposing teams who had spent years struggling to sell lower bowl tickets suddenly recorded sellouts. Franchise records were broken repeatedly, not because of local stars, but because Clark's name was printed on the schedule. She became a traveling economy, an engine capable of generating hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, in revenue every time she landed in a new city. But Clark didn't see a cent of that money. Not from ticket surges. Not from merchandise spikes. Not from concessions, parking, or VIP packages that fans purchased specifically because she was in the building. Financially, her season looked less like a professional sports contract and more like an unpaid internship that accidentally became the centerpiece of a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. And here's where the tension becomes unavoidable. Clark's celebrity didn't just elevate the league's value, it exposed how underfunded the players have been for decades. Her presence highlighted a truth owners had hoped to avoid confronting this soon. Revenue is rising much faster than player salaries. With the new $2.2 billion media rights deal, the WNBA can no longer operate like a modest seasonal business. The economics have shifted dramatically, and now the players, including the rookies, want their fair share. Yet even within the union, Clark's financial impact has created a complicated dynamic. On one side, veteran players want a salary structure that raises wages for everyone across the board, from the stars to the 12th woman on the bench. On the other side is the reality no one can ignore. Clark generates exponentially more value than everyone else. Not just more, orders of magnitude more. The bench players aren't selling out arenas. They aren't crashing ticket websites. They aren't triggering network bidding wars. Clark is doing all those things while earning a fraction of what her influence is worth. This imbalance has created a quiet tension inside the WNBPA. Some players fear that if Clark gets special treatment or a salary cap exception, the financial gap within the league will widen. Others believe the league can't afford not to compensate her fairly, because without her, the entire system collapses. It's the kind of internal disagreement that can fracture a union at the worst possible time. Meanwhile, Clark's team is fully aware of the math. They see the attendance charts. They see the broadcast ratings. They see the sponsorship deals flowing into the league, largely fueled by her magnetism. They know exactly how much leverage she holds, and exactly how much money she's leaving on the table by accepting WNBA norms. That's why the rumors about her demands aren't seen as greed. They're seen as simple economics. For the first time, the league has a player whose value rivals not just the league stars, but the league itself. Even more interesting is what Clark represents to owners. She isn't just a rising star. She is the model for how future athletes will interact with leagues. Her brand is bigger than her salary. Her endorsements with companies like Nike and Gatorade dwarf her WNBA earnings. If she walked away from the league tomorrow, her income wouldn't dip at all. That makes her uniquely dangerous in a negotiation. Most players need the WNBA. Clark does not. And when a player doesn't need the league financially, the league loses its most powerful bargaining tool. The WNBA's biggest fear isn't that Clark will ask for more money. It's that she'll ask for what she's worth. Because if she does, The league has no way to justify offering her anything less without revealing how outdated its compensation model is. They're already struggling to explain how the player carrying their entire business can be making a lower salary than many entry-level corporate employees. The financial discrepancy has now become one of the primary reasons Clark is reportedly unwilling to accept a business-as-usual contract in the upcoming CBA. She knows her value. The public knows her value. Even the players who resent her popularity know it. And that uncomfortable truth sits at the center of every negotiation the WNBA will have until the new agreement is signed. Clark doesn't need incremental raises. She doesn't need symbolic gestures. She doesn't need promises of future improvements. She needs a deal that reflects her actual impact, and that number is so far above the current salary structure that the league can barely calculate it without breaking its own economic model. What started as an exciting rookie season became a financial wake-up call. Clark didn't just expose the cracks in the WNBA's pay system. She blew the entire wall open. And now the league is scrambling to rebuild before the next phase of negotiations begins. The WNBA has survived financial droughts, franchise relocations, and years when mainstream sports media barely acknowledged its existence. But what it has not survived well, what it was completely unprepared for, is the moment when its own leadership was thrust under the spotlight and expected to handle a generational shift with precision. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert entered the league with a corporate reputation, steady demeanor, and experience from the business world. On paper, she seemed like the perfect leader to guide the WNBA into a new era of growth. But once Caitlin Clark arrived and redefined the scale of that growth, the cracks in the leadership approach became impossible to ignore. The first major issue emerged during Engelbert's handling of rising hostility and targeted physical play around Clark. Fans were outraged, former players were calling it embarrassing, and analysts were demanding answers. But Engelbert's public responses were soft, vague, and, at times, shockingly disconnected from what viewers were seeing. When pressed about concerning foul calls and the heightened aggression toward Clark, the commissioner pivoted toward talking points about rivalries and increased engagement, as if the chaos on the court was a marketing asset rather than a problem that needed urgent intervention. This kind of messaging exposed a deeper leadership blind spot. Clark wasn't just another talented rookie. She was the most valuable marketing asset the league had ever seen. Her games were turning into televised spectacles, her jerseys were selling out instantly, and her presence alone pushed network executives to offer billions for future media rights. Yet instead of treating her like a pillar of the league's future, the WNBA treated her like an interchangeable piece, one that could be shoved, hit, and criticized while leadership tried to spin the negativity into a storyline. But leadership missteps extended beyond game night issues. A particularly damaging moment came during an interview about the rising hostility and vitriol aimed at players online and offline. It was an opportunity for Engelbert to take a strong stance, to show empathy, and to signal that protecting players, both physically and emotionally, was a foundational priority. Instead, she awkwardly deflected, shifting the conversation toward corporate sponsorships and vague optimism about league growth. To many players, her response sounded cold, dismissive, and painfully out of touch. That single moment did more damage than most fans realize. Within the WNBA Players Association, morale was already delicate. Veteran players had been fighting for improved travel conditions, health benefits, and reliable protections for years. They were used to being ignored by previous administrations, but they expected more from this one. So when Engelbert missed what seemed like an obvious chance to lead with strength and empathy, the union's internal frustration erupted. Players didn't feel heard. They didn't feel protected. And they no longer trusted that their leadership could guide the league into this new era. The union's decision to opt out of the CBA was not a sudden impulse. It was the culmination of dozens of small trust fractures that had been building over time. But Clark's arrival escalated those fractures into a full-blown crisis. The league needed a commissioner strong enough to manage unprecedented growth, protect its newfound star, and handle the emotional dynamics between players. Instead, it got leadership that appeared overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. The expansion of the league also amplified the pressure. New ownership groups in markets like San Francisco, Toronto, and Portland had paid record fees to join the league. Those investors expected stability, professionalism, and a clear vision for the future. But when they looked at the handling of Clark's season, Missteps in public communication, unresolved tensions among players, and no apparent plan to protect the league's biggest revenue generator, they became concerned. Expansion owners don't spend millions to join a system in disarray. They expect leadership that can scale, innovate, and execute. Instead, they found themselves tied to a league whose internal structure was suddenly being questioned by every analyst in the country. And then there's Clark herself. The longer the leadership crisis continues, the more empowered she becomes. Athletes are often told to trust the system, but Clark has no reason to. She watched the league fail to protect her physically. She watched the commissioner avoid addressing the hostility surrounding her. She watched the Olympic Selection Committee silence her name from a roster that should have included her purely from a business standpoint. All of these moments add up to a simple conclusion. The establishment does not have her best interests in mind. That realization is dangerous for the league because Clark does not need the WNBA as much as the WNBA needs her. She has endorsements worth millions, brand campaigns that transcend basketball, and leverage from competing leagues offering her ownership-level opportunities. If leadership cannot prove that they can manage a superstar of her magnitude responsibly, there is no reason for her to commit to them long-term. This is the true leadership crisis, not a PR issue, not a negotiation challenge, but a structural failure of trust. A league cannot function when its players distrust its commissioner. A league cannot grow when its biggest star does not feel valued or protected. And a league cannot negotiate from strength when every misstep pushes its most important player closer to the exit. The WNBA is discovering something the NBA, NFL, and MLB learned decades ago: leadership matters. Not just financially, not just organizationally, but emotionally. In moments of explosive growth, players look to the commissioner for direction. Clark looked, and what she saw was hesitation, confusion, and a system that still hadn't recognized how much she had changed the league. The question now is whether the WNBA leadership can adjust before Clark makes a decision that could reshape the sport permanently. If there was one moment that revealed the full disconnect between the basketball establishment and the reality of modern sports culture, it was the now infamous Olympic snub. On the surface, the decision by Team USA Selection Committee to leave Caitlin Clark off the Paris Olympic roster was framed as a purely basketball decision. They insisted it was about cohesion, international experience, and maintaining veteran chemistry. But to the public, and to millions of new fans who entered the sport because of Clark, none of those explanations made sense. What they saw was the biggest star in the world being kept out of the biggest stage in the world, and nothing the committee said could justify it. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Commentators across the political spectrum questioned the decision. Analysts who rarely discussed women's basketball were suddenly dissecting roster politics on national TV. Social media erupted with frustration as fans pointed out a truth the committee didn't want to acknowledge. The Olympics are not just about basketball, they are about business. And leaving Clark off the roster wasn't just a questionable sporting choice, it was an economic disaster. NBC, which had been preparing for massive viewership spikes, reportedly took a major hit. Clark's absence meant millions of casual fans, people who had never watched Olympic women's basketball before, had no reason to tune in. The networks expected Caitlin Clark to be their crossover star, the athlete who could draw global attention the way Michael Phelps or Simone Biles once did. Instead, the roster announcement landed like a missed opportunity that exposed a bigger problem. The people in charge were stuck in an old mindset, ignoring the demands of a new era. But the real shift happened quietly, behind the scenes, inside Clark's own camp. The snub wasn't just disappointing, it was revealing. It showed her exactly how the establishment viewed her. Despite generating record-breaking revenue, transforming the league's visibility, and becoming the most influential athlete in women's basketball, she was still treated as if she hadn't earned her place among the veterans. It didn't matter that she had elevated the sport more in 1 year than many organizations had managed in decades. To the selection committee, tradition mattered more than momentum. That moment planted a seed. It forced Clark to question something she hadn't fully confronted before. If she could be excluded from the Olympics for political or cultural reasons, what else could the establishment take away from her? Olympic teams are selected by committees, not by metrics or fan sentiment. And if committees were willing to deny her a global stage where billions of eyes would be watching, what guarantee did she have that any other institution, whether the WNBA or the Players Association, would treat her fairly. Even more telling was the public reaction from players and coaches. Some were respectfully quiet. Others hinted that Clark's presence would be too distracting. A few went as far as suggesting she hadn't earned her spot. The rhetoric exposed a tension that went deeper than basketball. It revealed a culture clash between veterans who felt protective of their long-held hierarchy and a new wave of fans who saw Clark as an undeniable phenomenon. From a business standpoint, the snub was catastrophic. From a cultural standpoint, it was tone-deaf. But from Clark's standpoint, it was liberating, because it made one thing brutally clear: she owed the establishment nothing. She didn't owe loyalty to people who didn't support her. She didn't owe deference to committees that prioritized politics over performance. She didn't owe patience to a system that punished her for being too popular, too impactful, or too disruptive. And that realization will directly shape the upcoming CBA negotiations. Because now, when the WNBA asks Clark to trust them, to commit long-term, to accept deals that underpay her or place her in a hostile environment, she has the perfect response. The last time I trusted the establishment, they left me off the biggest stage in the world. The snub wasn't just a mistake. It was a turning point that shifted Clark's mentality from gratitude to strategic independence. It pushed her closer to exploring alternative leagues. It made her more resistant to WNBA-friendly contracts. And it heightened her awareness of how fragile her position within traditional power structures really was. It also shifted public narrative dramatically. Suddenly, every negotiation, every rumor, every leaked report was framed in a new light. Is the league supporting Clark, or holding her back? That framing is catastrophic for the WNBA because it means the public has fixed expectations. Any action that appears anti-Clark becomes a PR crisis. Any delay in offering her a fair contract becomes evidence of incompetence. Any tension inside the league becomes a story that points directly to poor leadership. The Olympic snub didn't just expose resentment. It exposed the WNBA's inability to protect or elevate its most important asset. And as Clark prepares for decisions that could define the future of women's basketball, that memory will sit front and center. It may very well be the moment that pushes her toward a bold choice, one that reshapes the sport forever. As the WNBA tries to navigate the most important negotiation in its history, another force is putting pressure on the league. One that doesn't come from players, fans, or the media. It comes from the new owners who have recently bought into the league with record-setting expansion fees and sky-high expectations. These investors didn't join the WNBA for nostalgia or charity. They bought in because they saw a financial opportunity emerging from one undeniable source: Caitlin Clark. The league's newest franchises, San Francisco, Toronto, and Portland, entered the picture at a moment when the WNBA had never been more visible. Record attendance, surging viewership, exploding merchandise sales, all of it fueled by Clark's arrival. Expansion fees soared because these owners believed they were buying into the future of women's sports, not its past. They expected a league on the rise, powered by a star who could fill arenas, sell jerseys, and attract corporate sponsors with a single social post. These owners weren't just betting on the WNBA. They were betting on Clark. And that's exactly why they're panicking now. Because the one thing expansion teams need more than anything else is predictability. They need to know that when they open their doors for their debut seasons, fans will show up. They need to know that sponsors will attach their brands to the excitement and growth. They need to know that the media will continue to promote the league at the same intensity. All of that depends on one factor: Caitlin Clark remaining in the WNBA and committing to the league long enough for these new franchises to build momentum. If Clark refuses the upcoming CBA, or even threatens to hold out, expansion teams suddenly face an uncertain financial future. Their valuations could drop. Their early season momentum could collapse. Networks that paid billions for broadcasting rights might demand compensation or renegotiation. And sponsors, who love predictable photogenic stars, may scale back their commitments. No company wants to launch a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign around a league that just lost its biggest attraction. This isn't just speculation. It's a reality that every owner, every investor, and every corporate partner understands. Clark isn't just a player. She's the foundation of the league's current economic boom. If she steps back, the entire growth curve flattens. But the pressure doesn't stop at ownership. Corporate sponsors are quietly watching the league's culture with a microscope. They're paying attention to the hostility Clark has faced, the unnecessary physical targeting, and the jealousy narrative that refuses to die. Brands like State Farm, Gatorade, Nike, and dozens of rising corporate suitors want stability. They want positivity. They want to attach themselves to Clark's impact, not to the negativity surrounding her treatment on the court. Every time she's shoved to the floor, every time veteran players take subtle verbal shots at her, and every time the league ignores the backlash, corporate confidence erodes. These sponsors are investing in Clark because she represents growth, charisma, and national appeal. What they don't want is a league that seems determined to dim its own brightest light. And Clark knows all of this. Her team understands the sponsor dynamics. They understand the expansion ownership pressure. They understand that the WNBA cannot afford a public relations collapse. Not now, not with billions in future commitments and the eyes of the sports world fixed on them. That knowledge gives Clark an even stronger position in negotiations. If she walks away, the league doesn't just lose a star, it loses the narrative, the momentum, and the financial security that expansion teams and sponsors require. Behind closed doors, expansion owners are already pushing Commissioner Engelbert to find a solution, no matter the cost. They want better pay structures, better travel conditions, and a better marketing plan for Clark, not out of generosity, but because their investments depend on it. They didn't spend millions to join a league that might lose its most influential player over mismanagement and outdated compensation rules. They invested because Clark turned the WNBA into a growth machine, and they expect that machine to run smoothly. This dynamic puts the commissioner in an impossible position. She must appease the veterans who've spent years building the league. She must negotiate with a players' union that is more united and more frustrated than ever before. She must satisfy billionaire owners who expect fast results. And she must somehow convince Clark, the most powerful athlete in the negotiations, that the WNBA is worth committing to long-term. It's a balancing act no commissioner in WNBA history has ever faced. One wrong move, one failed negotiation, one sign of indifference toward Clark's demands, and the league finds itself staring at a crisis that no amount of PR campaigns can fix. And that's exactly why this moment is so dangerous for the WNBA. The pressure isn't just coming from fans online or analysts on TV. It's coming from the financial backbone of the league, the owners and sponsors who have billions of dollars invested in the future. They want stability. They want growth. They want Clark. And they won't accept anything less. If the WNBA fails to deliver, it's not just Clark who walks away. It's the momentum, the confidence, and the economic boom she helped create. The league doesn't just risk losing a player, it risks losing its future. If Caitlin Clark ultimately decides to reject the WNBA's new CBA terms, it won't look like a loud, dramatic announcement. It won't involve angry social media posts or a public showdown with the commissioner. Her refusal would be strategic, calculated, and devastatingly simple. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because the WNBA doesn't fear her words, they fear her absence. What does refusal look like? It looks like Clark choosing not to report to training camp. It looks like her taking her time reviewing the CBA instead of signing it immediately. It looks like her stepping away for a season under the justification of rest, recovery, or focusing on other opportunities. A perfectly acceptable explanation that would cause no controversy from sponsors. The league might try to downplay it, but the networks won't. The sponsors won't. The fans definitely won't. The moment Clark steps away, the WNBA's ratings take a historic dive. The networks didn't pay billions for parody. They paid for Caitlin Clark. They paid for sold-out arenas, viral highlights, and national conversations that extend far beyond basketball. Without Clark, the WNBA can't deliver that package. And the league knows it. But refusal could take many forms, none of which the WNBA is prepared to fight. One scenario is a holdout. Clark simply wouldn't show up until the league offered terms that reflect her value. Traditionally, holdouts hurt the player more than the league, but Clark is in a completely different category. Her endorsements are massive. Her marketability is unmatched. The WNBA salary is pocket change compared to her sponsorship income. She could sit out an entire season and lose nothing. Meanwhile, the league would lose everything: ratings, momentum, public goodwill, and the perception that they're entering a new financial era. Another scenario: Clark plays exclusively for Unrivaled. This option would send shockwaves through the entire sports world. Imagine headlines declaring that the most influential star in women's basketball had chosen an alternative league, one offering better pay, equity, and full creative control. It would instantly legitimize Unrivaled as a competitor and force the WNBA to scramble for relevance. The league has never faced a domestic competitor with real financial backing before. Clark signing with Unrivaled would be NBA ABA-level chaos all over again. A third possibility is a sabbatical year. Clark could easily frame it as a chance to rest her body, build her brand, focus on training, or recover from the grueling physicality of her rookie season. No one could argue with that. But behind the scenes, it would be the ultimate pressure tactic. Every game played without her would visually remind the world exactly how much the WNBA depends on her. The league's biggest fear is not losing her forever. It's losing her long enough for fans to realize that the excitement isn't the same without her. Regardless of the path she chooses, the outcome is the same. The WNBA loses leverage. They lose negotiating power. They lose their most valuable asset at the exact moment they need her most. And the worst part? Clark doesn't have to say anything publicly. Silence is her strongest weapon. By not stating her demands, she forces the league into a guessing game. They don't know if she wants more money, more safety measures, more marketing support, or a complete overhaul of the league's culture. They don't know her bottom line. They don't know her timeline. They are negotiating with a moving target, and that target is the only reason their ratings reached historic highs. Inside the players' union, this silence is also causing tension. Some players want Clark to push for massive structural changes: better pay, better travel, better healthcare. Others fear that giving her too much leverage will create a star-driven system that leaves role players behind. The union is torn between what is fair for everyone and what is necessary for the survival of the league. And Clark, intentionally or not, has put them in the middle of a generational conflict. Her refusal would also place enormous pressure on the commissioner from corporate partners. Sponsors like Nike, Gatorade, and State Farm built entire campaigns around Clark. They don't want the face of their investment sidelined or unhappy. These brands didn't sign deals with the WNBA, they signed deals with Caitlin Clark. If she isn't on the court, the league's commercial value drops immediately. Corporate partners would be calling the commissioner demanding answers long before fans even realize what's happening. Then there's the issue of expansion. New franchises paid record fees because they believed they were buying into a future shaped by Clark. If she steps away, those investments devalue instantly. Billionaire owners will not tolerate that. They will pressure the league harder than anyone. They will demand changes, exceptions, or restructured rules, anything to keep Clark in the WNBA. They didn't spend millions to watch the league operate without its brightest star. And the truth is simple: Clark has every reason to walk if the league refuses to evolve. She has been underpaid, targeted, criticized, and mishandled. She has been excluded from major opportunities, ignored by leadership during hostile situations, and undervalued by the very system that profits from her existence. Her refusal would not be an act of rebellion. It would be a logical decision from someone who understands her worth. Because Caitlin Clark isn't dependent on the WNBA. The WNBA is dependent on Caitlin Clark. And if she ever decides to step away, even for a moment, the league's future instantly shifts from growth to survival mode. The refusal would become the most powerful statement in the history of women's basketball. A reminder that for the first time ever, the player, not the league, holds all the cards. There is one part of this entire story that dwarfs every salary dispute, every broadcast deal, every controversy, and every negotiation tactic. It's the part that could permanently rewrite how athletes across all sports make money. It's the element that terrifies the WNBA more than any threat of a holdout, any decline in ratings, or any internal conflict among players. And it's the reason Caitlin Clark holds more leverage than any female athlete in recent history. That element is equity. If Unrivaled truly offers Clark partial ownership of the league, a percentage of the entire operation, everything changes instantly. This isn't just a better contract. It's a completely different business model. It's the difference between being paid a salary and being paid for the value you create. For decades, the biggest stars in men's sports have found ways to build wealth outside of their playing contracts, usually through endorsements or investments. But ownership? That's a rare privilege reserved for athletes who transcended their sports entirely, like Michael Jordan or David Beckham. Jordan didn't become a billionaire because of his Bulls salary. Beckham didn't become a global icon because of his weekly paychecks. Their wealth came from equity, ownership stakes, revenue-sharing deals, and brand licensing partnerships that allowed them to profit from the systems they helped grow. Clark is now standing on the edge of that same opportunity. Unrivaled isn't just offering her money. They're offering her partnership, influence, long-term profit, decision-making power. They're offering her a chance to shape the future of women's basketball rather than merely participate in it. And that is something the WNBA is not built to match. The WNBA's financial structure doesn't allow players to own pieces of teams. It doesn't allow them profit-sharing rights in the league. It doesn't give them a say in how franchises operate. The league was built in the late 1990s, using an old framework where owners hold the power and players simply earn what the system allows. That model may have worked for decades, but it does not work in a world where the most influential athlete in the league has more public reach than the commissioner, more economic impact than most franchises, and more leverage than the union has ever possessed. If Clark accepts equity from Unrivaled, she doesn't just switch leagues. She becomes a co-architect of a new sports ecosystem. She becomes a symbol of athlete empowerment in a way that women's sports has never seen before. Future stars would follow her lead. Agents would push for equity deals. Player expectations would evolve overnight. And the WNBA, still operating under a 20th century structure, would be forced to modernize or risk becoming obsolete. That's why the rumor of an equity offer isn't just a rumor. It's a threat. A direct, existential threat to the WNBA's entire business model. Because how can a league that pays rookies $76,000 compete with a league offering ownership? How can the WNBA ask Clark to accept a contract with restrictions, fine print, and limited power when another league is offering her the keys to the kingdom? How can the commissioner expect loyalty when Clark can build her own empire elsewhere? People often underestimate what equity represents. It's not just money, it's identity. It's dignity. It's acknowledgement of value. It's a recognition that the star isn't just an employee. She is the reason the system thrives. And for Clark, who has spent her entire rookie season being hit, mocked, dismissed, underpaid, targeted, and mishandled, equity becomes more than compensation. It becomes justice. But the implications go far beyond Clark herself. If she secures an equity deal, every athlete with a large following will begin asking for similar treatment. College stars with millions of fans will expect ownership opportunities. Future WNBA rookies will arrive with negotiation leverage. Agents will no longer settle for standard contracts. The age of "take the deal you're given" will end, replaced by a new era where influence, branding, and public reach are as important as points per game. This is exactly the scenario that terrifies traditional sports executives. A future where athletes hold power equal to owners, because they control the cultural momentum that drives revenue. And Clark is the perfect athlete to usher in that shift. She's young. She's charismatic. She's massively influential. She's already a national brand. She appeals to demographics the WNBA has struggled to reach for years. And she has millions of fans who will support whatever decision she makes, whether she stays, leaves, sits out, or builds something entirely new. The equity war is not about money. It's about power. It's about ownership of the future of women's basketball. It's about who gets to make decisions that shape the next decade of the sport. It's about freedom from outdated systems and restrictive contracts. It's about giving the athlete the same respect as the institution. If Clark chooses equity, she changes everything. If she demands equity from the WNBA, she forces a complete rewrite of the league structure. If the league refuses, Unrivaled steps in and takes the biggest star the sport has ever seen. Either way, the era of passive athletes is over. Because Caitlin Clark is not just negotiating a contract. She is negotiating her role in sports history. And if the WNBA doesn't recognize that, another league gladly will. By now, one truth has become impossible to deny. The WNBA is standing at the edge of a complete transformation, and the catalyst behind that transformation is a 22-year-old rookie who never asked to be the face of a revolution. Caitlin Clark didn't enter the league looking to challenge a system, disrupt power structures, or expose decades of inequality. She simply showed up, played the game at a level that drew millions of eyes, and unintentionally revealed how unprepared the league was for a star of her magnitude. Her presence didn't just elevate women's basketball, it exposed the weaknesses that leadership had ignored for far too long. What makes this moment so historic is that Clark now holds a type of leverage that no player before her has ever possessed. She has the financial freedom to walk away. She has the public influence to shift narratives. She has a competing league offering her opportunities the WNBA legally cannot match. She has corporate partners who will follow her wherever she goes. And she has millions of fans who support her not just as an athlete, but as a symbol of a new era. This is why the upcoming CBA negotiations are not simply negotiations. They are a test of whether the WNBA is ready to evolve. The old framework no longer fits the new reality. The league can no longer operate like a small, developing enterprise. It is now part of a global conversation about athlete empowerment, brand economics, and the future of sports business. Clark is the first player to expose that shift fully, but she will not be the last. Whether the league admits it or not, the power dynamic has flipped. The player now shapes the institution, not the other way around. Fans sense this shift. Sponsors sense it. Analysts sense it. Even the players who resent Clark's rapid rise understand, deep down, that she is their greatest opportunity to secure higher salaries, better travel conditions, improved healthcare, and modernized benefits. Clark is the rising tide they all rise with, if they're willing to stand beside her rather than against her. But the WNBA is the one entity that cannot afford to misread this moment. If it refuses to adapt, it risks losing not just a player, but the very momentum that has finally pushed women's basketball into the mainstream spotlight. Clark's refusal, whether it comes quietly, symbolically, or definitively, would be a seismic event. It would force every executive, every owner, and every sponsor to confront the uncomfortable reality that the league's future depends more on how it treats its stars than on any business plan written in a conference room. This era will be remembered as the turning point. The moment when old systems were challenged. The moment when the league could no longer hide behind tradition. The moment when a rookie held the entire institution accountable. Whether the WNBA grows from here or collapses under its own resistance will come down to one decision. Will it recognize Clark's value and evolve accordingly, or will it cling to a structure that no longer matches the world it now operates in? The price of progress has risen. The expectations have risen. And the player holding the pen is no longer afraid to walk away if the terms don't match the impact she brings. The WNBA must decide whether it wants to build the future with Caitlin Clark, or watch her build it somewhere else. If you've made it this far into the video, you're exactly the kind of viewer helping change the conversation around women's sports. And if you enjoy deep dives like this, breakdowns that go beyond the headlines and explore the real power dynamics shaping the game, then you're going to want to stick around. Right now, the channel is still growing, and your support genuinely makes a measurable difference. So if you want to help push content like this further into the YouTube algorithm, hit the subscribe button to join the community we're building here. Drop a like if you found this breakdown interesting, informative, or eye-opening. And leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the Caitlin Clark situation. Do you think she'll stay in the WNBA, jump to Unrivaled, or force a historic deal? Every interaction helps the channel grow technically in the algorithm, boosts visibility, and lets us keep creating long-form content with this level of depth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.